Greetings and welcome to an LGR thing, and today is a bit of a more laid-back, unscripted, relaxed type of video while I'm working on more involved things, but this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, and that is computer CRT monitors and how to record them half-decently, which is something I try to do here on LGR as often as I can. I love showing these things, but they can be an absolute pain to get on video and not look like total garbage. It's not just eliminating flicker either, it's all sorts of other issues that I've run across over the years that I've had to come up with workarounds and, mess with my own hardware and software and other kinds of setups just to make it work for what I want to show, and hopefully this will be informative to you as well. I know I get a lot of questions about how to make these things look okay. So yeah, that's what we're going to dive into. And yes, I know that there are some other videos on YouTube that actually do a really good job of showing how to record CRTs of various types, but computer CRTs are their own beast. They're a bit different than what you would experience on just like a consumer TV set that's stuck at 60 or 50 hertz or whatever. And yeah, this is it's a thing, man. It's a thing. Let me preface this by saying that this will assume that you know a little bit about how cameras and CRTs work and their relation to each other with refresh rates and shutter speeds. We'll get into that, starting with the refresh rate. That's the first main topic I want to cover. Then moire patterns and the problems that arise there. Color and contrast issues, reproducing what you see in your eyes versus the camera. Reflections, dealing with those, and audio, because yes, CRTs can be a bit loud depending on certain situations. So let's dive into it. So starting off with refresh rate, and this is pretty much the most well-known method of reducing flicker and generally making CRT imagery look better, and that is syncing, or getting as close to syncing, the refresh rate of the monitor, the vertical refresh rate that is, and the shutter speed of your camera. And in this case, here in NTSC land, that would be 60 hertz, or really 59.94, rounded up to 60, and the shutter speed of 60 on my camera, and those more or less make it look good. And if you're on PAL territory, it'd of course be 50 hertz and shutter speed of 50, and there you go. You can also cut that in half and get some interesting results, and sometimes it might be better, but that really is just the beginning of the story when it comes to these things. If this were like a consumer television, that would pretty much be it, because those for the most part just stick to whatever the cycles are of your power source, but this is... Yeah, computer monitors, man, they're all over the place. So, for instance, this right here, this is Johnny Castaway, a screensaver going on Windows 95, and if I press the buttons on the front here and go into the menus and look at the status, you'll see that it's actually running at 60.1 hertz. But then if we just move the mouse and go back to Windows 95 and check that exact same menu and status again, you'll see that it's slightly changed. Now we've got 60 hertz exactly. And that's just one example of the many different deviations you're going to be seeing on computer CRTs, depending on the software, the hardware, the operating system, any number of other variables, the monitor itself. It's just going to be all over the place, and that's something to keep in mind, especially when you're looking for a camera or just thinking about filming these things regardless, because yeah, it's going to be all over the place. So sometimes it will not be anywhere close to 60. Sometimes it'll be like 70, 72, 75, 85, depending on what the software demands are, what your settings are, and all kinds of things. Now, if we're talking just Windows 95 and a lot of the games on there, typically they will stick to whatever your control panel settings are. So if you have it set to like the refresh rate of 60, they'll try to hold to that, especially if they're like Direct 3D games. But you go into DOS and a lot of other software rendered things like that, and sometimes it'll be 70, whatever. It really helps to have a monitor that shows you what exactly is going on at any given time. But you can also just play around with your camera's shutter settings and see what gets as close as you possibly can. But, a lot of cameras don't have that kind of fine tuning. You can go from like 60 shutter speed up to 80, or maybe there's a 70, but not a 72, and what are you going to do then? Well, that's one reason that I use the cameras that I do, for many reasons, but yeah, I've got these Lumix GH5 series cameras that I use nowadays. This is a GH5S, I'm filming with a GH5 there, and these have a feature on there called Synchro Shutter. I believe on Canons it's called something like Clear Scan, but it's on a whole bunch of different models of cameras these days, but it's a thing that lets you dial in to the 10th, or really in between that even, the shutter speed, and you can really dial that in there to get to like 60.1 or 72 point whatever, and it's really helpful for things like this where it is just a tenth off, or a tenth a little bit different, otherwise you'll see that rolling line more prominently. And it's also really useful for systems that aren't PCs, like that recent Macintosh video that I did, the 6100 DOS compatible. Mac OS side of things I think runs at 67 hertz-ish, 66.7 maybe, I don't remember. Yeah, it's a weird thing, and it looked crazy if I didn't have that going on. So synchro shutter is something that I can't really do without with filming these CRTs these days, at least if it's outside of the norm of 60 hertz. Although you can reduce it through software depending on your editing suite. I use Adobe Premiere Pro, and there's some various things that kind of reduce flickering on there, but the one that I use the most is actually a plugin. It's a paid plugin called Flicker Free, and that does a great job of eliminating CRT flicker. It was made for reducing flicker in time-lapse video and stuff like that, but works great with CRTs, and also for older LCDs, especially those with older CFL or fluorescent lighting behind them, the backlighting. That can flicker regardless of what the actual refresh rate is on the display itself. And the lighting behind the panel is just different, so that plugin helps. So the next big area of concern, and perhaps an even bigger one than refresh rate, at least for me, is the moire pattern problem, or moire. I'm gonna say moire because it sounds less silly. But anyway, yeah, moire. It's like an overlaying pattern that's just conflicting with the camera sensor, and it's caused by really a couple of different things, usually like the aperture grill or the shadow mask or whatever. There's like this pattern that overlays on top of the image and looks terrible. And if it's ingrained in your footage, you're pretty much just stuck with it. You know, you can alleviate it a little bit in post, but for the most part, it's just in there, and I think it looks terrible. In fact, it bothers me way more than flicker does. For whatever reason, it just hits my brain a certain way. I'm like, ah. And unfortunately, it's ended up in a lot of my shots because I just wasn't paying enough attention and was just sort of trusting what I saw visually, or not looking close enough on the viewfinder of my camera or the screen that was on the back of it or anything like that. And it became even more of a problem when I really upgraded to better 4K cameras a few years ago, especially the Lumix GH5, the original GH5. It was really exacerbated on that because of how crisp and sharp the image was. While that was great for certain shots, I mean, it made a lot of things look amazing when I recorded it. It made the moire pattern effect way worse. And it was really hard to dial that in and get it correctly, I don't know, appearing correctly. So what did I do about it? Well, I've tried all sorts of different things when I had the GH5. And that was, I mean, let's see, really the first most obvious thing to do is just focus the camera a little bit differently, and that usually means getting it slightly out of focus. So you can eliminate that by getting that aperture grill or the shadow mask or whatever is on your CRT slightly out of focus so that it's not so sharp on the image on screen, and that will usually get rid of the effect. Another thing you can do is just mess with your aperture settings and, you know, make it really wide so that it's not such a shallow depth of field, and that way you're not getting like weird bits of moire in the middle of your image, usually diagonally if you're shooting at an angle. And then another thing to do is just mess around with the angles. You know, if you're shooting at an angle like this, then it can really cause that pattern to emerge more obviously, and then it's going to be stuck in your footage and it sucks. You know, shooting directly straight on will fix that problem a lot of times, but then you're just stuck with a boring kind of shot of just looking directly at a CRT. And a lot of times I don't want to do that because I'm showing other bits of hardware or me in the shot or something like that. So you have to compensate with those other methods to get it looking half decent and try to eliminate that pattern. Even then, it's not perfect. There's almost always going to be that with certain cameras and certain angles and situations, depending on how you're focusing. Another thing that I've tried is actually using different diffusion filters. Like this one right here is a Soft FX2 something or other. I've tried probably 10 of these. I don't like how any of them look. They do eliminate the pattern or, you know, decrease it on certain sharper cameras like the GH5, but it makes everything soft, and I'd rather just have a portion of the image softer, and you can do that in post, so I just don't even do that. One thing that made a huge difference though was completely stopping using this camera anyway, and I upgraded the GH5S for multiple reasons, but one of the biggest was because it has a built-in optical low-pass filter in the hardware, and that means effectively that it is putting Yeah, well, a filter in your footage, no matter what. You can't turn it on or off. Like, it's not even on the options of the camera. I don't even know if they advertise it, but it has it. And it makes your image slightly softer, but in a way that I think is pretty smart. And honestly, I think the footage looks way better overall. That optical low pass, man, I didn't even know that was a thing that a lot of cameras were going without these days, like the original GH5. So if you can find a camera with an OLPS in there, it's awesome. Yeah, that's pretty much that. Again, you really just got to mess around with angles and placement of your camera and lights and everything else just to make sure that it's all coming together properly. And also, don't rely too much on the smaller screen on the back of your camera if that's normally what you use. I've started using an external monitor because of this, because sometimes it'll look great in that little screen on the back of your camera, and then when you get the footage on your computer, you're like, oh, well, this there's a moire pattern there, and it's just ruined the whole shot. And you know, that's one of those things, because of the nature of the way that pattern works. When you scale it, you know, scaling it down, maybe there's no pattern at all, but when you scale it up to like a full-sized image, then you're going to be seeing it very obviously. So yeah, there's a lot of things to mess around with there, but holy crap, be aware of it. I've seen so many people shoot CRTs and the moire is there, and I'm like, what are you doing? Is it just me? Does this not bother anyone else? Anyway, it's a thing. Look out for it. So another thing to consider with CRTs is the color and contrast settings and brightness and things like that. Just basically making sure that your CRT looks good in the resulting footage. And, you know, I'm going to throw in reflections in here as well, because if you have a reflecty, kind of glossy CRT, that can cause some issues. And, you know, lighting and things like that. Like I have a light right there and over there. So that can all wash out the image on the CRT itself. In fact, if you look at this one that's behind me right here, here's how it looks normally if I just don't touch the footage. I don't know, it's not as impressive. The blacks aren't as black as they should be, and the whites and the highlights and shadows, like everything is just kind of wrong. So I do a lot of adjusting in post, just on the CRT itself, not affecting the entire image. I mean, I color correct everything, I adjust everything. But the CRT in particular, I put like a little mask around that and feather it and whatnot. And again, I use Adobe Premiere Pro, so I use the Lumetri color plugin that it comes with. And I usually do a few different things depending on the situation, like just adjusting the contrast, the highlights, the shadows, sometimes the white and black level, but usually not. And then I mess around with the actual saturation values of individual colors. Especially on a CRT, I've noticed that a lot of extremes for like, well, red, green, and blue, for instance, just don't look correct. So I bump those up. And then also lower some to make sure they're not too insane. Like the blues, especially on a CRT, can look, I don't know, everything can have this kind of teal, light blue look to it. Like grays look more light blue than they should. But yeah, that's all like filters and stuff. The rest, I try to get the best possible image in camera to begin with. And, you know, that just comes down to a lot of experimentation with lighting and angles of the room ambience itself. Like if you're filming a CRT in a room with sunlight, that's really easy to screw up. Right now it's dark outside and I'm just using inside lights, so I've got more control over it that way. And since we're kind of on this whole topic of like lighting and making sure the colors and everything look good, contrast, reflections can do a lot to degrade the CRT's image. So one thing that I love using are these little filters here. This is a circular polarizer. It is, of course, going to, being that it is, you know, darkened and such, you're gonna lose some stops, and your image is gonna be darker. But as you can see here, just sort of plopping it on and off the lens, not only is the CRT looking darker, you know, as far as the black levels and whatnot, but everything it really is. And it eliminates some of the reflections right around the keyboard area, where you could see the reflection in the bottom of the screen, or my hands, or, you know, just all sorts of things. The wood on the table looks better. It's not picking up so much of that light bouncing off of the whites on the walls and whatnot. I just like these polarizers. I use them for absolutely every shot that I use or that I make on LGR. Yeah, I've got a bunch of these. This is the one in particular. This is, yeah, I'll put whatever it is right along the bottom of the screen here. It's got kind of a long name. But yeah, circular polarizers, very much recommend those if you have the light for it. If you don't, you know, you might not want to bother. You can make it look good on a CRT without these, but these definitely help in reducing reflections and glare and things like that. Now, it's not going to get rid of everything, of course. If you've got lights directly on your CRT, it's just going to be glare all over the place. And you're always going to see yourself in the screen if you're filming at a certain angle. Again, though, that's just playing around with like your camera placement and trying to eliminate that in the scene and not worrying about it later on or with filters or anything like that. Although again, those settings in Premiere that I use and adjust the color and everything else, also you can tend to get rid of some of those reflections if you're like decreasing the highlights and things like that. You just don't want to ruin the CRT image or make it look unnatural or anything. I mean, unless you want to, but I don't. So the final thing I want to touch on here, at least for this video about recording CRTs, is the audio side of things. And yeah, that is something to consider in your recordings. You know, even if you can't hear it yourself, which is very much possible depending on your hearing situation. A lot of people start to not be able to hear these really high-pitched frequencies like this. But yeah, certain CRTs, especially like consumer television sets and older ones, like this one right here, it's an IBM 5154. That has a horizontal refresh of around 15 kilohertz. It's like 15.7, I think, is the like frequency range, and that actually equates to some audio feedback. Actually, if you listen to this right here, I've had it filtered out for the rest of the video. Now I don't. Yeah. Let's get rid of that now. Typically, I just put this audio filter on every single one of my videos that have a CRT and this kind of range with horizontal refresh like that, around 15.7 kilohertz. And that just involves lowering something in like a graphic equalizer or a notch filter, or whatever is going to get rid of that range of audio so that you don't hear it. And sometimes I add a couple of passes within Premiere just to make sure that it's really gone. Because I don't trust my own hearing, so I make sure to look at the levels and stuff on the software. Yeah, another thing to consider is that other CRTs, like for instance this one right here, makes another sound, and that has to do with the components in there actually aging. Usually it's around the flyback area. You've got like ceramic capacitors and ferrite transformer cores and all sorts of weird things in there that are going bad or slightly off, or something is just making a sound. And it's a little bit different from that audio whine that is just inherent to the horizontal refresh of these older ones like this, or just regular TV sets. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind as well. Sometimes I forget about that, and then in the recording I'm like, that noise is overwhelming. But anyway, so yeah, those are two different kinds of sounds that I really listen out for with CRTs when I'm going through the footage. And something else to keep in mind is that like the other CRTs that I was showing earlier, those have a horizontal refresh of around 30 kilohertz. That is typically not audible. In fact, I don't know anybody can hear that. You don't have to bother with any kind of getting rid of the high-pitched whine in the footage that way. So audio, it really is an important aspect, even if you can't hear it yourself. It's just one of those things that absolutely sucks. You go through all this pain of getting this nice CRT footage and you put it on YouTube, and then you forget about the audio, and somebody's inevitably like, I can't watch this video because it's killing my ears and it hurts. So yeah, just something to keep in mind, as with all these other things. Alrighty, well that's about it for this topic on this video anyway. Of course, with things like this, there are always more ideas and solutions to discuss, and I'm sure you've got some of your own if you had any experience with this kind of thing. If so, let me know in the comments, because really half the reason I want to make this video is not only to inform, but to learn myself, and maybe we can get a discussion going and come up with some new things. I mean, for instance, like different lenses and focal lengths and situations that can change on the camera itself can change the result on the CRT, especially with a moire pattern problem and whatnot. And there's also things like etchings and anti-glare filters and things on the front of certain CRTs, or that you can put on there yourself, that provide interesting results. Or you can even start adjusting the options on the CRT in terms of the brightness and contrast and color to help it look a little more accurate to what your eyes see in the resulting video once you've recorded it, not have to mess around with software and filters in post so much. And yeah, there's just all sorts of things. I mean, not even mentioning stuff like the whole Genlock idea and other scalers and hardware adapters and solutions to take one frame rate or refresh rate and adjust it to something else. And yeah, man, it's a pretty endless topic. So let me know your thoughts, and again, any of your experiences in the comments, and I hope that you enjoyed this and maybe found it a bit informative as well. And if you liked what you saw, then awesome. Perhaps you'd like to check out some of my other videos here on the channel. I've got new stuff going up every week here in LGR on all kinds of topics, typically retro computer hardware and software related. But yeah, whatever the case may be though, thank you very much for watching.